everybody. My name is Sharon Grant, and I'm going to be the moderator of this session, and it's based on the power of experiential education. And we have a jam-packed session. We've got some powerhouse people here on this panel and presenting, and we've also got global representation. We've got Hawaii represented, we've got Arizona, we've got Costa Rica. We also have local Sun Valley represented. So we're going to go ahead and kick off right on time, and I'm going to go ahead and welcome you to the session. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. We'll be a presentation by our distinguished speakers discussing the concept of place-based experiential learning and the collaborative initial Pebble. So anytime you hear us say Pebble, you'll know what that stands for. A panel discussion will follow the speakers with an interactive audience conversation covering the following topics: the value of measuring the success of place-based experiential learning, the scalability of a major university, the importance of training future sustainability leaders to address local challenges, the need to leverage today's global collaboration capabilities into the local place. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers, and I'm going to turn it over first to Dan Lutkenhouse and Kate Logan. So Dan is our first speaker. Dan Lutkenhouse Jr. is the President and Executive Director of Hawai'i Tropical Bioreserve and Garden. Dan is passionate about reconnecting people with the natural world, and he's working to further expand the Hawai'i Tropical Bioreserve and Garden's role to include sustainability education. They're currently working with Arizona State University to pioneer a new initiative that will help bring online place-based experiential learning programs to other locations and organizations all around the world. Ms. Kate Logan, the Ambassador of Experience and Advancement at Hawai'i Tropical Bioreserve and Garden, will also be discussing the need for place-based experiential learning. So welcome, Dan and Kate. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
As you can see, Hawaii Tropical Bioreserve and Garden literally is synonymous with place and experience. HTBG is a 40-year-old botanical garden created out of the passion of a California businessman, Dan Lutkenhouse Sr., who has not only loved plants, but also realized the importance of protecting and embracing nature and all living things. Good afternoon. My name is Dan Lutkenhouse Jr., and I not only have the honor of being part of one of the most special places on earth, but my team and I also have the responsibility to assure that HTBG is here for the next 40 years. I'm going to try to share about 2.5 years of observation and a few aha moments that we've had. But we think it's important that you have a context of what we think place-based experiential learning is. I'll try to do that all within 6 minutes, so please bear with me if I speak fast. And I look forward to speaking with all of you and learning from all of you during our panel discussion. This is Onomea Bay on the east coast of the Big Island of Hawaii, more specifically Hamakua Coast. It's the only subtropical rainforest in the U.S. on the ocean, open to the public, which is home to over 2,500 rare and endangered species of tropical plants. HTBG is a 501c3 nonprofit consisting of over 100 acres of Hawaii oceanfront, with 20 acres currently open to the public. Its 3 core mandates are to be a living seed bank for tropical and subtropical plants, to educate the world on the necessity of taking care of protecting the world's fauna and flora, and to preserve and protect the Hamakua Coast. If you're not familiar with Hawaii, and more specifically the Hamakua Coast, Hawaii is considered one of the most diverse areas of the United States, with the Big Island being the most diverse in all the chain. Onomea Bay, which is where we're located, is home of the most diverse population of fauna and flora. So we're talking about the most valuable and condensed ecosystem in the U.S., if not the world, all nestled within a small 20-acre site. Next slide. Over the course of time that I had the honor of running the garden, I have also had the privilege of speaking with many of our guests. Undoubtedly, almost everyone absolutely came back ecstatic about the place, and at least every other guest would come up and literally tell the staff what a highlight of the garden was the trip to the Hawaii, and they had no idea there were so many incredible diverse types of plants in the world. Additionally, we had guests that were so moved by the experience itself, it literally brought them to tears. However, in my observation, I realized though this was truly a place that invoked an incredible experience, they were not having the educational experience to align this with their own place back home. In other words, there were a few lessons learned and resonating about sustainability. We realized we had much more of a garden here than a garden here, though the roots were based in the horticultural discipline. We really had a complete environmental system which could easily be translated into most any place on this earth. But we realized we needed to develop an educational framework around place-based experiential learning. So these lessons could be embedded in the person's persona and actually brought back home with them. In other words, it didn't take us long to know it was not the garden that we needed to teach people about, but the need for people to become part of the solution of saving this planet. Otherwise, there would not be a garden in 40 years. So the HTBG team worked on defining a problem statement, which you see on your screen. There's a disconnect between people and nature, lack of place-based knowledge, lack of understanding on how local changes and perspective affect the global solution. The traditional educational methods that we've been employing, they need to adapt. They're not working any longer. And more homegrown, local sustainable leaders are needed to address the global challenge. Next slide. So what was the opportunity? So some of you movie buffs may have heard of the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. This in reality, so you got Kevin there, thanks. So in reality, this is a theory of 6 degrees of separation, which has been around for a long time. The simplified version of the theory is that any person on the planet can be connected to any other person on the planet through a chain of acquaintances that has no more than 5 intermediaries. In modern times, this has been written into an algorithm by computer companies such as Microsoft to actually create networks and the internet. Recently, it was validated by Facebook, and due to social networking, they concluded that the world's population is only separated by 3.6 people now. So in that, the light bulb went off. Using the opportunity to influence so many people that visit HTBG, we could influence the world every 2.6 months with a well-defined sustainable educational plan. So the Earth's problem were solved, at least in our mind. Next slide. Oh, back, there you go. So we started to work on the solution, and we came up with this. Engage people in hands-on, interactive, and immersive learning. Encourage observation and reflection to build critical decision-making skills. Connect local history and culture in the ecosystems to develop a sense of place. Ultimately, teach people how to be successful, sustainable leaders using all the tools available to them, really at a local level. And most importantly, we need to foster local exploration to a global exploration. So in other words, we need to take the local context and have it look up to the globe opposed to the globe looking down to the location. We only had to come up with an educational seed that we could plant in all our visitors' heads so they could carry it back and have them planted in their community. That would be easy, right? Next slide. So the idea of the Pebble initiative was born. I think we're 2 slides back. So there you go. When we looked at the problem, opportunity, and solution, we needed to have a framework. The framework we came up with was supporting and embracing the UN Global SDGs goals. They were natural to us and we were already following them. We needed a measure to validate what we were doing was actually having an effect, thus the context of sustainable competencies. We needed a community so we could leverage the other people's knowledge, especially local-based wisdom. And we wanted to create a nexus of sorts of ideas so they could be shared with a larger audience. Next slide. We then thought, what would the components be? So we created a toolbox. Now we had the ideas, they were literally growing in trees all around us. We had identified the goals, teach people about being part of the sustainable future. And we certainly had the place, HTBG, but we didn't have the tools, we didn't have the know-how or the curriculum to really engage our guests. So that was the problem. There was really no outcome. Next slide. Accordingly, we sought out the most dedicated and intellectual group of sustainable educators and thought leaders in the world, as well as a forward-thinking organization, which was the Julianne Wrigley Institute of Sustainability at USC. We worked diligently to create a relationship to learn as much as we could and invite their team to use HTBG as a platform and a living laboratory, not only for place-based experiential learning, but as a classroom and laboratory for their studies in field studies in plants, ocean, and people. By doing so, we were working towards not only addressing the missing pieces, but we were confident that ASU and their scalability could take the lessons learned and propagate them to other places around the globe, such as national parks, zoos, or really any place where people were connecting to their own natural environment. So there was a synergy being created from lessons learned and techniques at the local level into a global thought leader who could easily speak global and can scale all the way back down to the local levels. Next slide. So in summation, it's hard. No matter how many assets you have, to craft the correct experience that resonates with local people is a very, very difficult task. Leverage is key. Though we all would love to influence and educate every child and person in the world ourselves, we can't. As practitioners in this space, we need to teach the teachers. We need to support them and engage them and help them any way so they can go out into the communities. You need to have a framework and share the tools. Don't do it on your own. Leverage other people and knowledge. Reach out to the core professionals such as ASU. We need to make this work from a local level to a global level. I would like to now turn it over to our next set of speakers who will talk to you more about actual value derived from place-based learning, and look forward to talking to you a little later in the presentation.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dan. I mean, this sounds like such an important education concept, and it's rooted in such a critical ecosystem to be connected to education. So I'm excited to see what kind of questions come in related to that. And with that, I do want to turn it over to our next speaker. And if I didn't mention before, I am actually based here in Sun Valley. This is my home. And so Lindsay Molino is one of my neighbors. She is up next, and she is the Executive Director of the Environmental Resource Center in Blaine County, Idaho, which is where Sun Valley is based. And Ms. Molino works to connect people and nature by tackling large issues on a local scale. Her organization's environmental education programs reach people of all ages and provide individuals with opportunities to gain the knowledge, tools, and confidence needed to become stewards and leaders in our community. And with that, I enjoy working on projects with you, Lindsay, and I can't wait to hear what you're going to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you so much to the Sun Valley Institute Forum for inviting us to be part of such a distinguished and amazing panel. Not like it's a competition, but I'm going to throw a little elbow at my colleagues in Hawaii for a second. We are a local nonprofit, but local for Blaine County. We've got a landmass twice the size of Rhode Island, so we got a lot of local here. Next slide, please. So you just heard this incredible bird's eye view framework of Pebble, place-based experiential learning, and I want to give you a flavor of what that looks like here on the ground here in Idaho. So the ERC, who are we? Sharon just gave you a bit of an introduction, but we're a local funded, local founded, local focused nonprofit here in Blaine County, Idaho. And you can see up on the screen that the list of programs are really 25 years of experience of responding to immediate needs, right? So, oh my gosh, we don't have a recycling program out here. Let's create a recycling program. We have a ton of trails and people have hiking with their dogs. We're at the headwaters of some major river systems. Okay, great. Let's create a dog waste trailhead pickup system. So it's very problem focused, very nature focused. And so for us, and I was kind of nodding vigorously when Dan was speaking, I think we also had a bit of a soul searching moment as an organization where, you know, for 25 years, we've been reacting to immediate needs and providing value and hustling. But if you take a step back, there's a question of, okay, wait a second, like, why do people have to come to us in the first place, right? So thinking less about the nature piece and more about the people piece. Next slide, please. And so what you see here is a bit of a mad scientist sketch when we tried to really think about what could a people-focused place-based theory of change look like for us here in Idaho, where, you know, people who are our neighbors are everyone, you know, from Sharon to botanists with the Forest Service to my next door neighbor who, you know, carries a rifle on his ATV when he's moving cattle around, right? What combines us? What can we use as a common ground? And so when we started looking at all of this and trying to think about just how rare it is to hit that sweet spot of you have the opportunity for action, you actually have the skills to do so, and you have a community that supports you, the one thing that just came out was education, place-based education. And so we then sort of have now looked at our programs to really think about how can we highlight that and just like Dan said, really train the trainers or think about people first and problem focused. And so I'll give you one quick example of how that looks. So if you're a kid here in rural Idaho, and I say this as a kid who grew up in rural Idaho, science seems like something that happens far away, right? In Hawaii or Arizona or in the Amazon. Sustainability, decision-making, policy, it's something that's quite remote. And so a lot of our programs have been focused on making sure that you know, kids are in the middle of the river, taking water quality samples and creating a scientific experiment, becoming scientists before they even realize that they're doing it, right? And then once you have the experience, there's no going back. You've already been transformed. And so there's lots of examples like that we have used to really think about how do you create that transformative aha moment. Next slide, please. And what I'll just leave you with here, because I know we have a lot of speakers to get to, and I'm happy to speak to sort of more of our theory of change and any of the questions, is these are some of our summer fellows who joined us during COVID summer. And the thing that I would just encourage everyone to remember, and this panel, I think you'll hear it over and over again, is this is about people. And so there's huge untapped potential. And folks are just looking for tools and opportunities to tap in and be part of the team. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I can speak for my 7-year-old, and he's really enjoyed being a part of some of ERC's programs. And with that, we're going to move on to Costa Rica. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Palola, the Executive Director of Guanacaste Dry Forest Conservation Fund. Mr. Palola works to help safeguard and promote biodevelopment of the large and biologically complex area de conservación, Guanacaste. I have to test my Spanish and speaking, in partnership with the Costa Rican government. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eric, and if you want to expand at all about your history, I just can't wait to hear what kind of work you're doing in Costa Rica related to this.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I just test? We're good on that? Okay. Well, maybe we can go to the first slide, which is already there. So I'd like to share a bit of our experience with place-based experiential learning, specifically through a public, privately supported biological education program that is geared to rural schools in Costa Rica. And so here's a group of 7th graders from a little town called Garita, which is in a very rural part of northwestern Costa Rica, about 6 kilometers from the border of Nicaragua. They're inside a remote research station called Estación San Gerardo within area de Conservación Guanacaste, and being shown the complex natural history that exists in their own backyard. And I wanted to start with this photo because I think it kind of encapsulates the role and the value of place-based experiential learning. And you can, if you look closely, you can see the wonder and the reactions on the kids' faces to this big sphingid caterpillar that's in the foreground, which is about the size of a small banana, that our colleague Osvaldo is holding, while Gloria on the right in the back is explaining what they're looking at in the life cycle of this caterpillar. And behind her, behind the kids, is the regular teacher for this class, who is learning along with the kids. Next slide. And so where they were was in one of those black boxes in the narrow, dark green corridor in the middle right of this map, which puts them in Caribbean rainforest just east of the Continental Divide that runs through 3 volcanoes inside the park where we work. And you're looking at about 418,000 acres of terrestrial and marine conservation across 4 distinct ecosystems that make up the area de Conservación Guanacaste. Programa Educación Biológica, or PEB as we call it, was developed alongside the vision of the park itself to ensure that generations of kids who live near and around the park would not be estranged from their own natural history. And a key bet made by the PEB program early on is that these kids, when they're adults, would become part of a society that accepts and supports the presence of a large wildland because they know and understand it, as opposed to the sort of tension that exists at the interface of many public lands and local communities. Next slide. So PEB was conceived in the late 1980s to be a government-run program by the equivalent of Costa Rica's National Park Service, and today it provides basic biology and science training to roughly 2,000 kids from 50 elementary and middle schools that surround ACG. It does this with 5 full-time educators and a budget of about $500,000 per year, some of which we, the supporting NGO, help to cost share. And just to note the tagline at the bottom, the word bioalfabetizamos basically translates into becoming bioliterate. In other words, learning to read the forest in the same way you learn to read books in the 3rd and 4th grade. And so that full sentence essentially says becoming bioliterate through experiences in the natural library. Next slide, please. And this is what a class in the field looks like on a given day. The kids have worksheets for whatever the theme topic is for the day. I took this photo a couple of years ago, and I think the theme for that day was morphology versus phylogeny, and something I was frankly a little rusty on myself. You'll also notice all the kids wearing snake chaps that are provided by the program. Next slide. So this may be hard to see, but this gives you a sense of the landscape of schools that are served by the PEB program. This is roughly a 30 to 40 square kilometer region, and all those little red flags on the map are participating schools. Next slide. And so they learn to tell which snakes are venomous and which are not. And of course, with this kind of knowledge, they begin to appreciate the complexity of what lives in the forest. And in this case, that all snakes are not bad or dangerous. Next slide. Or they gain the understanding and understand the cycle of native trees, such as the explanation being provided here by Rosie, one of the PEB educators, about the fruit of cow, what we normally call mahogany tree, most of which was stripped out of Costa Rica for boat building and other uses decades ago. And so to finish, I should emphasize that PEB classes are not just occasional fun field trips for these schools. PEB actually supplies the science program for 3 elementary and 1 middle school grade for all of those schools that are on that map. And what happens is each day a government bus goes out to one of those schools on the map, picks up that class with a teacher, brings them to a different part of ACG. One day they might go to the rainforest, another day to a coastal mangrove estuary, another day to a farm on the edge of ACG. The program provides lunch and supplies and pays insurance and brings the class back to their school at the end of the day. Each class gets 6 trips to ACG a year. Again, keep in mind, that's their science program. So you can imagine 4 grades and 50 schools and 6 trips for each class is a lot of program content to deliver. But the approach of using your classroom and experiential learning is really, really fundamental to the curriculum of these small rural schools. And I'll just conclude by saying that the success of the PEB model is not gone unnoticed. It has been copied and used in other Central American countries, and it is also today the concept example that the current Ministry of Public Education is using as part of a national bioliteracy education initiative. So with that, I'll stop and thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Great to hear about Costa Rica. I've always loved the impressive commitment that Costa Rica has had to education. So it makes sense to me that they're progressive in having this education as well. So I'm going to move on quickly to our next speaker. We're going to move to Arizona. Dr. Jesse Sanko is an assistant research professor and senior sustainability scientist at Arizona State University. Dr. Sanko's research links science with practice to understand and solve dynamic fisheries and wildlife conservation challenges of the 21st century. He is passionate about training future conservation leaders to develop and test conservation solutions by engaging them in place-based experiential learning. And you'll see that this kind of learning applies to all age categories, higher education, and everything. So with that, Jesse.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for putting this together and for inviting me to participate. The title of my talk today is Pebble, Training Future Conservation Leaders in the 21st Century. And before I talk to you about our place-based experiential learning program that we've developed at Arizona State University, I want to touch on our research program because it's really important to understand how we link our research then to our teaching and specifically to Pebble. Next slide, please. So our lab here at Arizona State is the Sanko Lab for Fisheries and Marine Megafauna Conservation. And our mission is simple. We train future conservation leaders while developing and testing conservation solutions. Next slide, please. And our approach is really built on 4 fundamental pillars. So this includes empowering. So we empower a really diverse suite of stakeholders. That includes fishermen, researchers, resource managers, as well as practitioners. We innovate, and our innovation is specifically geared towards developing pragmatic, low-cost conservation technologies that we can then take to scale to solve conservation problems. We then implement these solutions. So we don't just develop them, we implement them, and we use the community and a market-based approach to implement them and then scale them up from local to global scales. And then finally, we use Pebble, right? We use place-based experiential learning to train the next generation of conservation leaders. And I'm going to touch on all 4 of these pillars throughout my presentation. Next slide, please. So we've got 4 global study sites here in our lab at ASU. Our first and foremost is we work in a chain of islands off the coast of Baja California, Mexico, primarily in the Sea of Cortez, but also along the Pacific coast of Baja. We've got another study site at the St. Lucie Power Plant on Hutchinson Island, Florida. We have a new study site that we're very excited about in Trinidad and Tobago. And we also have a new study site that we're equally excited about, and that is in Hawaii, looking at one of the most endangered sea turtle populations in the world, the East Pacific hawksbill turtles. Next slide, please. And so, okay, our first approach is empowering these diverse stakeholders. How do we do that? It's really simple. We work with communities to inspire conservation rather than demand it. And this is contrary to some degree with other approaches. And we emphasize shared goals and a message of resilience. This is really important because everybody wants to be resilient, whether they're fishermen, whether they're researchers, or even the marine community. Next slide, please. We've been partnering with fishers since 2003, specifically to co-develop responsible fishing solutions. So our approach is fishers want to fish. How can we help you make that fishing more responsible? And I think this is a really important approach because we're not looking to shut them down or change their livelihood, which in many respects can be deemed as demeaning. And we share solutions and knowledge. We've held fisher-led workshops, presentations, and fisheries exchanges between Mexico, the United States, Japan, as well as Costa Rica. Next slide, please. And we innovate. So here's our second pillar. We innovate to develop pragmatic, really low-cost conservation technologies. And I'm going to focus on one of our really exciting new projects. Next slide. So we've developed solar-powered illuminated fishing nets. What is that, you ask? Well, on the bottom right, if you can see, that is a gill net. Gill nets this is the most common, the most globally ubiquitous fishing gear in the entire world. If you throw a dart on a map and hit a coastal area, they will have gill net fisheries. As you can see, that net is set on the bottom of the ocean. And when an animal, particularly an air-breathing animal like a sea turtle, a seabird, a marine mammal, even sharks or rays, these collectively, these species that we term marine megafauna, which are charismatic but also very vulnerable and endangered, hit these nets, they end up drowning. And we've found by developing solar-powered buoys and placing those right on the top of the net, just as their normal fishing buoys are, we've reduced sea turtle bycatch by 70%. We've reduced shark bycatch by a whopping 95%. That actually includes sharks, rays, and skates. Just a stunning result. And collectively, we've reduced the marine megafauna bycatch, including small dolphins, porpoises, sea turtles, sharks, and rays by 85%. So an enormous reduction in biomass. And we've done this all by actually maintaining or even slightly increasing the target catch that the fishers are after. So a win-win, as we like to say. Next slide, please. Here's just a very quick diagram of what it looks like. Next slide. And here is a picture of one of our fisher partners. This is Juan Pablo Cuevas, who lives on an island in the Gulf of California. This is the smallest island inhabited by a single family in the world. And here he is fishing with one of our solar-powered nets. Next slide, please. We're very proud of the coverage this has generated within our community. Our work has been featured on the cover of Arizona State University's official magazine, and so we're very excited about the interest we've generated from this project. Next slide. Okay, very quickly, we develop these solutions, but then how do we actually get to the community? So another pillar of our approach is implementing these community and market-based solutions. Next slide, please. And these are solutions that can be taken to scale. So we've already had a patent pending on our light, and our goal is to essentially have these throughout the world. Next slide, please. Okay, finally, what you're all been waiting for is how do we translate this research to Pebble, right? How do we use this to train the next generation of conservation leaders? Next slide, please. So what we've done is we've essentially developed academic courses, study abroad programs at each of these study sites. And our main objective is to leverage these existing research sites. So as you remember, we have 4 global research sites. And so I'm there, our research team is there. Why not take students into the field? And that's been our approach. And then what we do is we leverage the existing relationships we have at these universities to develop cost-effective programs. Right, we already are working there. We already have grants to conduct the research. We already have grants to buy the gear. And so how can we use those relationships to really develop cost-effective programs that serve underrepresented students? And so essentially what we've done is created a program where students join us in the field and really absorb and understand our approach to conservation. Next slide, please. And I very quickly want to touch on a case study we have. This